Hello everyone, I am Abhinav. Today I will be telling my opinion on goanimate voices. I will respect your opinion on them, and it's my version, so let's get started. First is Adam. Adam is my favorite Siriway voice. It sounds so MLG. Next up Aditi. Aditi is okay, but the voice is kinda annoying sometimes. Next Alan. I like the Alan voice. It sounds brave and MLG. Next up, Alex. Alex is okay, but it is very weird. Next is Alison Kepstrel. It is very good and a clear voice. I like this voice. Next Alison Oddcast. This voice sounds so funny in MLG. The crying voice is sometimes annoying but I still like it. Next is Amy Siriwave. This voice is very weird. It's not that great but I respect your opinion on this voice. Next, Amy readloud.net. This is okay but it's an angry voice, and it can be annoying sometimes but I still like this voice. Amy Voiceferg. It is a good voice and it's very cute and a clear voice. Next up, Andrew. Andrew is alright, it sounds cute but not that much, so I am neutral with this voice. Next is Andy. Andy is alright, it just sounds annoying sometimes, but cute at the same time. Next up Arthur. Arthur is okay, I'm neutral over this voice. Next, Ashley. Well, the Ashley voice is okay, but not that great. It is annoying sometimes but I respect your opinion on this voice. Next is Audrey. Well, Audrey is okay but it's kinda low-pitched. Next Ava. Ava is okay, but it's kinda annoying. Next up, Bad News. Bad News is very funny, I like this voice. Next up Belle. I like the Belle voice. It sounds crazy and funny, also it sounds like MLG. Next up, Bells. Bells is the funny voice. It sounds like a bell talking like a human. Next up Beth. I like the Beth voice. It sounds so cute. Next up, Boing. Boing is alright, I'm neutral with this voice. Next up Brenda. I do not like the Brenda voice at all. It sounds so annoying and irritating. Next up Brian. I like the Brian voice. It is the best British voice ever. Next up Bridget. Bridget is okay, but the voice is a bit annoying and weird plus it's a low-pitched voice. Next up Caitlin. Caitlin is okay, it's weird at times. Next, Callie. Callie is okay, the voice is kinda funny. Next up, Carlos. Carlos is okay, but the voice is deep. Next, Carolyn. To be honest, Carolyn is very weird and annoying sometimes. Next Catherine. Catherine is my favorite female oddcast voice. It sounds so good and I like the exclamations she says. Next up Charles. Charles is weird a bit, because it sounds grumpy. I never heard about a grumpy voice. Oh well. Next, Charlie/young guy. This voice sounds so cool. I like this voice so much. Next up, Child. Child is not that great. Why? Because it sounds like Crybaby. I found it only 25% cute. And it's very weird. I respect your opinion on this voice. Next, Choir Boy. Choir Boy is funny, cause it's a funny singing voice. Next, Claire, UK. I'm neutral over the British Claire voice. Next, Claire, USA. This voice is okay, but it's annoying sometimes. Next up, Colossus. Colossus is okay, but it is kinda noisy. Next up, Conrad. Conrad is actually good. It sounds like a teacher or professor. I like this voice. Next up, Crisp Mail. It is okay, I'm just neutral over Crisp Mail voice. Next up, Crystal. Crystal is alright, it sounds clear but I'm neutral over the voice. Next up, Dallas. Dallas is one of my most liked voice in Kepstrel/Voiceferg. It sounds like a cowboy. Next up, Damien. Damien is called as the scary voice in goanimate. I'm okay with the voice, since it sounds funny sometimes. Next up, Daniel. I like the voice. It sounds MLG. Next up, Dave. Dave is my favorite oddcast voice. Even though it sounds deep, I still like the voice. Next up, David. David is alright, I still like the voice a bit. Next up, Deepa. Deepa is okay, I still like the voice. Next up, Demon. I do not like the voice at all. The reason for it is because it sounds very irritating than Damien. Next up, Designer Dave. Designer Dave is alright, but the voice accent is kinda weird. Next up, Diane. Diane sounds outstanding. I like the voice and it's my favorite voice Ferg voice. Next up, Diesel. I have some complaints about this voice. First, it sounds so deep. Second, it sounds annoying. Third, it sounds like a fat angry person. I just dislike the voice a little bit. Next up, Dodo. Dodo is not that great, because it sounds like an old man and it's very deep. Next up, Dog. Dog is very funny, isn't it? It really sounds like a dog woofing instead of speaking. Next up, Duchess. I do not like the voice at all. The reason for it is because it sounds very gay. It is in the female category but sounds like a male voice or a gay voice. Next up, Duncan. Duncan is okay, but the voice is not loud enough to listen. It is used for someone being sick or faking sick. Next up, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is okay, but the voice is very deep. Next up, Ella. Ella is okay, but the voice is noisy and annoying. Next, Emilio. Emilio is okay, I'm neutral over the voice. Next, Emily. Emily is okay, but the voice is not loud enough. Next up, Emma. Emma is okay, but the accent is annoying sometimes. It's the high of pitch of Amy, readloud.net. Next up, Eric. Eric is my favorite voice of all time. It is pronounced cable, and he also makes an tasty sound effect. I like this voice. Next up, Evan. Evan is just okay, but I'm neutral over the voice. Next, Evil Genius. I do not like the voice at all. The reason for this is because it sounds like a drunk person. Next, Fast Fred. Fast Fred is not that great. It sounds funny but fast. Next, Fiona. Fiona is okay, but the voice is kinda weird. Next up, Fiona. I do not like the voice at all. The reason why I hate this because it goes really fast. It's Scottish and it sounds like it is from another country. I hate this voice a million times. Next up, Frank. Frank is great, but I'm neutral over this voice. Next, French Fry. I like this voice, because of the accent sounding so funny and hilarious. Next up, Geraint. Geraint is okay, but according to some users, the voice accent kinda sounds weird. I like the voice a bit. Next, Gethin. Gethin is a good voice and it sounds cute. Next, Ghost. Ghost is okay, but not so much good. Next up, Giant Male. It's okay, I'm just neutral over Giant Male. Next, Giles. Giles is my other favorite Siri-wave voice. I like this voice because it sounds very awesome. Next, Goblin. Goblin is kinda funny and I still like this voice. Next, Good News. Good News is actually funny. It sounds like a human singing with a goanimate song Pomp and Circumstance. Next, Grace Oddcast. Grace is not that good. It sounds like an angry and annoying 55-year-old woman. I respect your opinion on this voice. Next, Grace Svox. Svox Grace is okay, but the voice is kinda annoying. Next up, Graham. Graham is okay, I'm neutral over this voice. Next is Gregory. Gregory is okay, I'm neutral over this voice Ferg voice. Next, Gwyneth. Gwyneth is not that great, the voice accent is weird. Next, Hannah. I despise this voice. Why? It sounds so stupid and annoying. But, I still respect your opinion on this voice. Next, Harry. Harry is okay, I'm neutral over this voice. Next, Heather. Heather is okay, I just neutral with this voice. Next up is Hugh. To be honest, Hugh is my liked voice, but it sounds deep. I still like the voice. Next up, Isabella. Isabella is very awful, I dislike the Siri-wave voice. Next up, Ivy. Ivy is my favorite readloud.net voice, it sounds so cute and funny. Next up, Jack. Jack is okay, I'm neutral over this voice. Next up, Jackson. Jackson is okay, but not that great. Next up, James. James is my favorite voice. I like the voice cause it sounds cool just like Eric. Next up, Jennifer. Jennifer is my favorite voice. It sounds so funny including her crying. Some people mostly use it on Oliak. Next up, Jerkfus. Jerkfus' voice is very awful, it sounds like Charlie Brown in an annoying accent. It also sounds like a jerk criminal. I respect your opinion on the voice. Even for the oh voice, it goes so slowly. Next, Jersey Girl. Jersey Girl is a very good voice. I like this voice so much. Next up, Jess. Jess is okay, but the voice is annoying. Next is Jill. Jill is the funny voice. It has now improved. Back then, it skipped the punctuation. Thank God it has now improved. Next up, Joanna. Joanna is okay, but the voice is kinda soft. Next is Joelle. Joelle is kinda cute, but I'm neutral to this voice. Next up, Joey. Joey is the funniest voice of all time. I like this voice so much. Next, Jordan. Jordan is okay, but it kinda sounds weird. Next, Josh. Josh has very good voice in Plotagon. I like the voice cause it sounds like a good kid. Next up, Julie. Julie is the sweetest voice. I like the voice so much. Next up, Justin. Justin is very good. I still like the voice. Next, Karen Oddcast. Karen is not great. It sounds annoying like Grace from Oddcast. Next, Karen Plotagon. Karen Plotagon is my favorite one. It sounds very good. Next up, Kate. Kate is alright, but it sounds like an angry woman. But, hey, on the bright side, it sounds like a grown-up. Next up, Catherine. Catherine is okay. I still like the voice. Next up, Kayla. Kayla is one of my favorite voices. I like this voice because it sounds like a 5th grader. Next up, Kendra. Kendra is one of my liked Ivona voices. It sounds like a grown-up. Next up, Kenny. Kenny is one of my liked a cappella voices. It sounds like a toddler. Next up, Kevin. Kevin is okay, but the voice is kinda annoying sometimes. Next up, Kitaru. Kitaru is the funniest voice in VoiceFerg. It is commonly used for person getting so much angry or getting hurt very badly. I love this voice. Next up, Kimberly. Kimberly is one of my favorite voices. It sounds like a teenager girl. It is the high pitch of Kendra. Next up, Kirsty. Kirsty is okay, but it's very annoying. Next up, Lakshmi. Even though it's on my nationality Indian, this voice is still annoying for me. Next up, Large Male. Large Male is okay, it sounds kinda like a grown man. Next up, Laura. Laura is not great. I am not satisfied with this voice that much. Next up, Lauren. Lauren is okay, I still like the voice. Next up, Lawrence. Lawrence is kinda good, but it sounds like a grandpa and it kinda goes very slow. Next up, Leo. Leo is okay, but the voice is deep. Next up, Lee. Lee is actually sounding very good. It sounds like an adult. Next up, Liam. Liam is okay, but the voice is kinda soft. Next up, Linda. Linda is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Lisa. Lisa is okay, but the voice is weird like Laura. Next up, Lucy. Lucy is okay, I'm neutral over this voice. Next up, Mary. This voice sounds like a girl talking on Attitude, so this one is weird for me. Next, Male. Soft voice. Male is okay, but it kinda sounds soft. Next up, Martian. Martian is very funny, I like this voice so much. Next up, Matilda. I do not like the voice at all. The reason why I hate it because it sounds irritating. Next up, Matthew. Matthew sounds actually good, it sounds so awesome. Next up, Megan. Megan is okay, but the voice is kinda boring. Next up, Mellow Male. Mellow Male is okay, but the weird part about it is that it echoes a bit. Next up, Micah. Micah is okay, but it is very deep. Next up, Michael. Michael is great, it sounds very good. Next up, Michael V3. Michael V3 is okay, but the voice is kinda cringe. Next up, Miguel. Miguel is actually good, I like this voice a lot. Next up, Mike. Mike is very funny, I like this voice so much. Next up, Milk Toast. Milk Toast is okay, and it sounds a bit funny. Next up, Millie. Millie is okay, but it kinda sounds like Bridget. Next up, Minch. Minch is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Moira. Moira is okay, and I still like the voice. Next up, Munchkin. Munchkin is very funny, it sounds like SpongeBob SquarePants. Next up, Nathan. Nathan is okay, I am neutral to this voice. Next up, Nelly. Nelly is very cute. I like this voice so much. Next up, Nerd. I do not like the voice at all. This oddcast voice sounds very awful. Next up, Nicole. Nicole is okay, but it's not that great. Next up, Nicole Siri Wave. This one is okay, I still like the voice. Next up, Nazar. Nazar is okay, but the voice is very deep. Next up, Noel. Noel is very good, I like this voice a lot. Next up, Obama. This voice sounds exactly like President Obama. This one is still good, but it mispronounces some words. Next up, Oliver. I do not like the voice at all. The voice sounds so annoying. Next up, Olivia a cappella. This voice sounds actually good. I like this one. Next up, Olivia Oddcast. I do not like the voice at all. It just sounds annoying in female version of Oliver. Next up, Owain. Owain is okay, but it kinda sounds weird. Next up, Paul. This voice sounds so amazing. This actually sounds like a teenager. I love this voice. Next up, Peter. Peter is very good voice, including Peter Happy and Peter Sad. Next up, Pixie. I do not like the voice at all. This voice sounds very awful. I respect your opinion on this voice. Next up, Prabhat. Prabhat is okay, but it is kinda weird. Next up, Prashant. Prashant is okay, but it sounds kinda weird. Next up, Princess. Princess is my favorite voice. I like this voice because it sounds similar to Kayla. Next up, Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth sounds exactly like the Queen, but I am sad because she died. Rest in peace our Queen, and this voice is also good. Next, Rachel. Rachel is okay, but the voice is kinda deep. Next up, Ransom Note. Ransom Note is very funny. It talks in different accents. Next up, Ravina. Ravina is okay, but the voice is kinda deep. Next up, Rona. Rona is okay, but the voice is very weird. Next up, Rich. Rich is very awful, cause it is very deep. It sounds like a 65-year-old man. Next up, Robin/tween girl. Robin is alright, and I still like the voice. Next up, Robot Siri Wave. Robot is okay, but it sounds really weird. Next up, Robotoid. Robotoid is just like Robot, but different. And it is weird as well. Next up, Rod. Rod is my favorite Plotagon voice of all time, because it sounds very funny and smart just like Eric and James. I prefer this voice a lot. It is also the current voice I'm using right now in my Plotagon avatar. Next up, Rosie. Rosie is the cutest voice in Plotagon. I like this voice so much. Next up, Russell. Russell is one of my favorite Ivona voices. I like this voice because it sounds like a footballer. Next up, Ryan. Ryan is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Sally. Sally is one of my favorite voices. It sounds very gorgeous. Next up, Samantha. Samantha is one of my favorite Oddcast voices. I like this voice because it sounds great. This is heard on the iPhone text-to-speech settings too. According to Angry Birds comedian 1996 Yes Star Luna No, Black rapper dude in the United States of Michael and Jonathan, this voice is heard when you buy Best Buy. Next up, Sanjita. Sanjita is okay, but it is very deep. Next up, Sarah. Sarah is one of the worst Siri Wave voice ever. Because the crying voice is very cringe. And it sounds like an 67-year-old woman. Next up, Sol. Sol is okay, but it sounds really annoying. Next up, Scott. Scott is alright, and I still like the voice. Next up, Serena. Serena is alright, and I still like the voice. Next up, Sharon. Sharon is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Shouty. Shouty is one of my favorite voice for voices. It sounds very funny like Kitaroo. It is used if someone is really angry. Next up, Shy Girl. Shy Girl is the cutest voice ever. I like the voice so much. Next up, Simon. This voice is my favorite, but it mispronounces some words. Next up, Skippy. Skippy is one of my favorite voices. It sounds very funny. Next, Soldad. Soldad is one of my favorite Oddcast voices. The OOO voice is very funny, cause it sounds like a funny elephant. Next up, Steven/Kenneth. Steven is very awesome. I like this voice because it sounds like a brave person. Next up, Stuart. Ugh. Stuart is not that great, because it sounds like an old man. Next up, Sue. Sue is okay, but I am not satisfied with this voice. Next up, Susan Oddcast. This voice is my favorite female voice ever. It sounds like a grown-up girl. Next up, Susan Voiceferg. This voice is my favorite Voiceferg voice, but according to Raquel Reby, it has some echo to it. Next up, Tomika. Tomika sounds very clear. It is one of my favorite Voiceferg voices along with Susan. Next up, Tessa. Tessa is okay, but the voice is not great. Next up, Tipsy. Tipsy is kinda funny and alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Tom. Tom is my favorite Oddcast voice. It sounds brave just like Steven. Next up, Tomos. Tomos is not that great, it sounds very weird. Next up, Top Hat. Top Hat is okay, but it's kinda annoying. Next up, Tracy. Tracy is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Tyler. Tyler sounds very good. I like this Plotagon voice. Next up, Valeria. Valeria is okay, I am neutral with this voice. Next up, Vina. Vina is my favorite voice of all time. It sounds like a sincere woman. Next up, Victoria. Victoria is okay, I am neutral with this voice. Next up, Vixen. I do not like the voice at all. I hate it because it goes really slow and it gives me nightmares. Next up, Vlad. Vlad is alright, I still like the voice a little bit. Next up, Walter. Walter is okay, I am neutral over this voice. Next up, Warren. Warren is okay, I am neutral with this voice as well. Next up, Whispery. Whispery is alright, it is used for someone whispering to others' ear. Next up, Will. Will is one of my favorite voices of all time. It sounds so cool. Next, Will Bad Guy. Will Bad Guy is okay, I am neutral over this one. Next, Will From Afar. This voice is okay, but it is kinda noisy. Next is, Will Happy. This one is alright, I still like the voice. Next one is Will Little Creature. It is another Minch duplicate. Next, Will Old Man. This voice is my favorite Will voice. It sounds like an healthy old man. Next, Will Sad. Will Sad is alright, I still like the voice. Next, Will Up to Close. This voice is alright. I am neutral with this one. Next, William Surrey Wave. This one is not that great, it is kinda deep. Next, William Voiceferg. William is alright, I still like the voice. Next up, Wise Guy. Wise Guy is my favorite Voiceferg voice. It sounds hilarious like French fry. Next, Yoda. Yoda is okay, but sounds very weird. Next, Zach. Zach is okay, but it is very weird. And last, Zoe. Zoe is alright, I still like the voice. So those were my opinion of GoAnimate voices. Please respect my opinion, and I will respect yours as well. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a like and subscribe as well. See you later. Goodbye.